Why were the Sith warriors of Vitiate's empire so incredibly weak compared to other Sith? Greetings again, Acolytes, and welcome back to the archives. The reconstituted Sith Empire first made its appearance in the year 3681 BBY, launching a surprise attack on their homeworld of Korriban, officially taking it back from the control of the Jedi. This spawned a conflict which would last for the better part of 30 years before the Cold War ceasefire was called. In its time, the Sith Empire rapidly gained territory throughout the galaxy using blitzkrieg-like style attack methods, and catching softer systems by complete surprise. It took a long time for the Republic to properly respond to this sudden Sith threat, but when they did, they were able to stop the Empire in its tracks, and even win back a lot of territory. The long conflict can be attributed to the often heavy losses of the Sith Marauders on the battlefield. When we actually watch the conflicts go down, we can see that the Republic Special Force troopers actually are winning confrontations with actual Sith Lords. This seems ludicrously impossible, but that's when we realize that the Sith warriors are actually the weakest that we've ever seen in history, and it's all Darth Vitiate's fault. So join us today as we open up a holocron and talk about how Vitiate sabotaged his own war efforts by making his Sith incredibly weak. So weak, in fact, that Republic soldiers could fight them one-on-one. Before we begin, we've had a terrible vision through the Force. Many who visit our archives are not yet subscribed to our order, so if you've been enjoying the daily openings of holocrons, reach out and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. We have foreseen it. Let's go ahead and address something up front. For the most part in this video, we are going to be talking about the Sith Marauders. Sith Marauders are the basic warrior caste of the Sith Empire. The Sith Lords of this era, such as Darth Malgus, were actually quite powerful, and we are going to get to those reasons why in a moment. But this all begins with an analysis on the Sith Emperor, Darth Vitiate. The goals and plans of the Emperor were laid out with extreme, meticulous detail, from his plan to attack the Republic to the construction of his empire. Vitiate had taken notes from other Sith empires and kingdoms which had failed in the past, especially the one in which he was born that was lost in the Great Hyperspace War. Vitiate knew that ruling with absolute power only got you so far with the Sith. Eventually, your underlings and friends will covet that power and do anything they can to overthrow and murder you. To ensure that Vitiate stayed in power forever, he would establish a system of absolute loyalty among his subjects. He would ensure that they were indoctrinated with the purest fanatic loyalty to the Empire above all else. This kind of obsessive patriotism through endless amounts of propaganda and mind training would make it that the average Sith Lord only desired to serve the needs of the state and never their own goals. It was this that made them horrifically weak. You see, it is the nature of the dark side to seek power at any cost. In a way, a Sith is only as strong as their ambitions are. When those ambitions are non-existent, so is passion. Remember the Sith code. Through passion, I gain strength. Acolytes, these aren't just words or a mantra, but an actual reality of operating with the dark side. When a Sith doesn't have goals or isn't doing literally anything they can for their own power, up to and including the betrayal and regicide, then they will stagnate in their own growth. A true Sith follower must completely immerse themselves in the dark side, essentially worshipping themselves and their own dreams. According to Darth Bane, this is what makes you attractive to the dark side, as he put it. The dark side of the Force is a mistress only enticed by aspiration, and more importantly, intention. She is quick to join Force wielders in a fight even if they don't want her, because their aspirations and intentions in that very moment is to defeat their enemy. This gives way to anger and passion, but if someone is brought up from birth in the ways of the dark side and told to use it for nothing else but for the glory of an empire, they have none of these emotions to fan the flames of the darkness within them. Vitiate didn't mind this happening to his Sith Marauders, or even some of the Sith Lords, because it ensured two things for him: that none of them would ever think to rise up and overthrow him because of their obsessive loyalty, and that even if they tried, they would be far too weak to stand up to the might of the Emperor. Vitiate didn't mind literally betraying the very code of the Sith because he was a man who only cared for himself. Of course, all Sith are self-obsessed, but what separates Vitiate's megalomania from the rest is that other Sith have their boundaries. Their boundaries end with the Sith code, which is the truest nature of the dark side. Vitiate, however, prepared to toss aside the Sith way whenever it no longer suited his needs, and he in fact would do that. Displeased with the Sith way, and realizing that it was not conducive to orchestrating an empire that he wanted, he would raise a generation of Sith that didn't adhere to the way of the dark side, and left them nothing but being corrupt imitations of the Jedi Order. And thankfully, we get to hear this from another Sith Lord. This is Palpatine talking directly about the warrior caste of the Sith, the Marauder, specifically from Vitiate's era. Warriors are animals. Agents like Darth Maul have their uses, but can never expand beyond their limited set of tasks. But now that we've addressed the warriors and the marauders, what about the true lords of the Sith of this era? The Sith of the Empire, the lords, were a mixed bag. Some of them were wholly devoted to the Empire, still full of patriotism that kept them in line. But divided from them were the other lords, who we should say were stronger, the ones who were loyal to the Empire because it was the easiest path to power and domination. This is where we find Malgus. From the beginning, Malgus would be a leader for the Empire, but he always had his own objective in mind. Malgus was ready to replace the Sith Emperor, but unfortunately was irritated by the bickering politics of the Dark Council. This kept him from rising as quickly in the ranks as he desired, even though he believed he was destined to be the Emperor. We can see the stark difference in his power as a result of his ambitions in relation to the other Sith. No better context is this displayed than in the fight between Malgus and Cal Sandaric and Darth Vindican. Despite Vindican being not only a Sith pureblood, but the master of Malgus, he was the one stifled by the Jedi Battlemaster. He had his mask sliced off by Dirach's lightsaber skill, and then took a cheap stab to the stomach following. Once the fight was over though, Malgus made short work of the Jedi Battlemaster, as he could smell his master's weakness, and so he destroyed it. The mix of strength and weakness within the Sith left the actual war efforts frustrating for the Empire. They had powerful leaders, but feeble followers. The Jedi Masters of this era, Ven Zalo and Satil Shan for visual example, were capable of cutting down Sith warriors with sometimes only a single lightsaber strike, but then would struggle once they actually fought the Masters and the Lords. Even the elite Republic troopers were able to occasionally triumph in melee combat against Sith marauders. While the Empire was able to gain ground, this came at a heavy cost to Sith casualties. It's no wonder that the Sith began getting steamrolled once the Eternal Empire showed up. At this point in the timeline, the Dark Council was in full control of the Empire, which created a host of problems. There is next to nothing good to say about the Dark Council. Second in power to the Emperor, the Dark Council was the supreme governing body of the Empire, and it consisted of 12 members, which then controlled the 12 spheres of influence. Every Sith in the Empire was beholden to the Council, but the seats on the Council were hotly contested, with some members only lasting months, while others would last decades. With the seats on the Council constantly rotating, petty political squabbles between the Dark Lords and the Council themselves were perpetual internal sabotage. The Council caused the Empire's hold on many systems to weaken, and many members of the Council were disgusted by the infighting, including Darth Mar. The Council was treacherous and disloyal to the Emperor, jumping on the first chance they got to betray him when they discovered he was no longer adhering to the Sith way. Even when the Council ruled the Empire, they could hardly unite anything. This kind of internal division left the Empire completely exposed and vulnerable to the Republic and the Jedi, and their defeat was ultimately a swift one. Instead of a blaze of glory, the resurrected Empire would peter out with a whimper. The Sith became feudal rulers of small Sith factions that poolballed the various corners of the galaxy, leaving them defenseless to Jedi Crusaders that mopped them up. In conclusion, while the Empire appeared very powerful on the outside, it had many critical cracks in the structure. All thanks to Vitiate, hardly any of the Sith underneath him had the passion required to make them powerful, and when Vitiate left, his lack of leadership left the Sith to crumble from its own internal rot. Even those as Malgus and Mar had ambition, and the power to rise above the rest to lead the Empire to glory would ultimately be inhibited from doing so because of the collective weakness of the Sith. But that, my friends, is the weakest era in Sith history, brought on by the most powerful Sith in Star Wars lore. But as always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the archives and the channel today, and as always, may the Force be with you.